Everyone has a fear, be it small, like the fear of spiders, or big, like history repeating itself. In the case of the Great Hurricane of 1900, whoever survived that hurricane would have something to fear. Today I'm going to introduce to you a topic of the Great Hurricane of 1900 and hope that you will be more informed on the events surrounding this tragic event. First of all, what is a hurricane? A hurricane is a type of tropical cyclone, which is basically a low-pressure system that forms in the tropics. Here is one picture. They usually go counterclockwise. It's just off the coast of Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. The Atlantic hurricane season, as noted on ready.gov, lasts from June to November. Its peak season from mid-August to late October. The hurricane we will be specifically discussing today hit the Galveston, Texas coast in 1900. It was a tropical storm at first, so nobody really worried about it. And it started in the central Atlantic on August 27th. Its original path was south of Hispaniola. After moving over Cuba, though, on September 3rd and 4th, it intensified. By the 5th and 6th, the path of the storm made a turn west, where it intensified to hurricane force strength as it passed Key West, Florida. On September 7th, Texas and Louisiana residents became worried and started their preparations for this massive storm. Here is the path it was taking, and it would have hit up just about here and probably lost strength if it had kept on as a tropical storm. But it turned west and hit Galveston as shown there. One man, according to the weather.com article, explained a man's flight to save lives. A Dr. Isaac M. Klein, meteorologist in charge of the local weather bureau, who lives in the Galveston Islands, just off the Texas coast. Klein was aware of the storm out in the Gulf, based on previous reports from Florida before most communication was cut off due to the intensity of the storm. Weather conditions were relatively calm on September 7th, and he could see that, but he could also see the signs that this storm was intensifying and might get rough through the night. This is the path. Once it hits the Key West of Florida, it strengthens to hurricane strength. Now, Dr. Klein knew that because of the increasing winds and the high waves, he tried to send a telegram to Washington, D.C., saying he thought a large part of the city was going to be underwater and that there might be a large loss of life. He rode a horse-drawn buggy up and down the beaches of Galveston trying to save lives, and managed to actually shelter 48 people in his house, of which 32 died, including Dr. Klein's wife. The hurricane of 1900 made landfall on September 8, 1900, in the city of Galveston, Texas. It had estimated winds of over 145 miles per hour, making it a Category 4 storm. Now, these are just estimates of the 145 miles because the barometers and the meters that check the wind speed had broken off and flown off the building. But due to the damage and loss of life and wind shear and wave strength, they said that it was Category 4. Now, an important thing to remember is that the highest point in Galveston at that time, the city, the highest point was only 8 feet. The wave surges were up to 15 feet high. No one could have predicted the death toll in a storm like this because of its dramatic shift west. The total loss of life can only be estimated at this time between 6,000 to 12,000 deaths. Most articles say about 8,000 average. It was also the second costliest hurricane in U.S. history based on the $2005 value. It compares cost-wise to Katrina. That night, the city of Galveston lost 20% of its population. The death toll might not have been so bad if rescue efforts had not been delayed. Due to the bridges being out and the rough shape of the train tracks, rescue efforts were delayed for quite a while. So those that did survive, if they were trapped under wreckage, there was little hope that they had survived. Now, averaging out about 8,000 people as having lost their lives will not vary. So the residents of Galveston tried to do something that they would later regret. Most of the dead were weighed down and sent out to sea for a sea burial. Unfortunately, when the tide came back in, it also brought the bodies back. For 6 weeks, the residents and rescuers of Galveston built funeral pyres to incinerate the dead, which only made it more tragic and morbid. The rebuilding of Galveston is still mentioned as one of the greatest testaments to the human spirit. To prevent another tragic loss of life, the residents built a sea wall spanning 50 blocks to protect the city. The city also set about raising its structures so that they were higher than the sea level, which took a huge effort, but the residents were thankful. When another hurricane pounded the city of Galveston in 1950, the tragedy was not repeated due to the new city safeguards. Now, you have to remember that these people had almost no warning, maybe a day. They didn't have any safeguards, they didn't have any wall or levees or anything to keep the water out. Their tragic loss of life estimated at 8,000. And then to have the wreckage, the rebuild, and just total loss of life, only to fear another hurricane. Through the tragedy of the hurricane of 1900, which is now called because hurricane naming did not happen until later, the tracking and warning systems that have now been developed to prevent events of this magnitude from ever catching coastal residents off guard. But one thing to remember, above all, is that Mother Nature will demand for food, just like Katrina, just like the hurricane of Galveston. Thank you very much.